Greetings, this is GBA 383. The course is Business and Society, and what we're going to be working on now is Chapter 6, The Ethics of Consumer Production and Marketing. Our goal here is to understand how products are developed and designed, the manufacturing process that goes into them, and then how do we market them or sell them to others in a way that makes sure that it's safe, that we're giving them honest and transparent information, and that we know people will not be harmed in the normal day-to-day use of our products and services. There are 7 objectives in this chapter. Number 1, we are going to identify the risks that occur with the use of consumer products. So we recognize that every product has the potential to harm us, even the most simple product on the market. But we need to understand the extent of those risks. Some of them are risks that are worth taking, and some of them are not risks that are worth taking. Regardless, people need to know what the risks are. So how do we make sure that we're clear with people what the risks are out there? Number 2, evaluating the arguments for and against consumer protection within markets. And again, we'll look at the ethics of this. Should we let people know, or is it more buyer beware? Like they have to understand and take the risk on their own. And we'll get into this, but certainly I believe that we have an obligation, any organization has an obligation to make sure their products are safe. And if we think back to Ford Pinto, right? And what happened to Ford when they developed products that uh, exploded on the road. And when consumers found this out, they got outraged and they didn't want to buy their product anymore. So it is really important for us to pay attention to consumer protection, making sure that they are not going to be harmed by things. Number 3, explain how a firm's moral duties to consumers may be held in a contractual relationship. And so when we buy a product, it's a contract. We expect certain things. They expect to get money for the product or service that we offer. So those things work together hand in hand. Number 4, describe the manufacturer's responsibilities to consumers as presented by the due care view. So what responsibilities do manufacturers have to us by making sure they have taken the proper care to ensure that the products are not going to harm people as a rule during normal everyday use. Examine the broader role of manufacturing responsibility as expressed by the social costs view. And again, when we talk about social costs, what we're talking about is, when we make a decision to manufacture something, what is the cost to the consumers, what is the cost to the community, and what's the cost to us and our reputation. Number 6, assess the ethical concerns associated with information and persuasion and advertisement. And so when we want to persuade somebody to buy something, we need to make sure that we're truthful in what we're telling people. There is always room for slight exaggeration, but we cannot mislead people to assume something will offer a particular attribute when it really doesn't. Or it says that it's going to cure us of cancer when there's no relationship to curing cancer. So it is important for us to consider why we need to be ethical in the way that we communicate to people about marketing and advertising. And then lastly, we'll outline ethical and unethical business practices as they relate to consumers' right to privacy. And so the right to privacy is huge. We don't want our consumers to know or to believe that we are selling their private information to others, to third parties, and what the challenge is behind that. So it is important for us to ensure that we are handling consumer information in a private and protected manner. And what we're obligated to do is to protect them from sharing that information. So what are some of the questions that we should be asking regarding the ethics of consumer production and marketing? Well, let's look first of all at some of the risk statistics. There are approximately 15.6 million injuries every year, often come from product errors, product misuse. And we're not talking about motor vehicles. We're just talking about normal everyday products, a bobby pin, a pen, a computer, a shelving unit, all those sorts of things. And that results in about 4,000 deaths that could have been potentially avoided. Although, of course, it really depends on, all sorts of variables, which we'll talk about in a few moments. So the estimated yearly cost of non-fatal product-related injuries is over $900 billion. That's a lot of money. So imagine companies that would rather take the risk of injuring somebody and pay out versus making sure that the product is as safe as possible. $900 billion. That is the cost to organizations, for that. So what are some of those costs associated with consumer products? There's the issues of deceptive advertising, first of all. So we mislead our consumers. We make them believe something will work better than it really does. So that's the deceptive advertising problem. Or we're telling them it should do something or it should have an attribute when in fact it doesn't. Um, we also have issues with product construction done shoddily, done in such a way that you touch it and it falls apart fairly quickly. Um, we see this in low-end products and services, low-end products like clothes or toys and things like that. All you have to do is go to Dollar General or Dollar Tree and buy some of the toys that are there, and you know that most of them don't last, and they tend to fall apart pretty quickly. So the things are not manufactured properly, it's constructed poorly. Then there's the product malfunctions, which is not necessarily a function of shoddy production, but more of the components in it not working the way they're supposed to. And so the thing malfunctions and it creates problems for people, including harming people in some ways. And then the warranties, which are not honored by manufacturers. So if you have a warranty for a product and the company doesn't honor that, that creates a problem and a harm to people. So this chapter is really going to focus on advertising and marketing and customer seller obligations, consumer privacy related issues, and making sure that we recognize what our obligation is to the person who is buying our products and services. So let's look at some of the everyday consumer risks that are out there. Let's start with talking about motor vehicles. Including pedestrians, motor vehicles kill about 30,000 Americans every year. And what we mean by including pedestrians, it means not only the people in the cars are at risk, but also pedestrians on the street are at risk. And so that results in about 30,000 Americans dying. Some of it is, driver error, and some of it is not. And we've seen issues with airbags, we've seen issues with brakes, things that are break down. I mean, there is a normal expectation of some errors and some mistakes that are happening. Our goal, of course, is to try to minimize that, right? We don't want people dying using our products because they won't buy our products again. But it is important that we really try to see how do we make sure that we are keeping our products safe? How do we make sure that our cars are not going to have errors and mistakes and kill people? And with the onset of self-driving cars, we're going to see more of this, I'm sure. Um, Motor vehicles accidents actually incapacitate about 260,000 people and injure about 2.2 million more. So there's lots of issues here. It isn't simply just you're hit by a car and you die, but it's the larger problems of incapacitating people, injuring them, where they are alive but they literally can't function anymore, or they lose function in some areas, traumatic brain injuries and things like that. Firearms kill 32,000 people and injure 65,000 more. And again, the argument, of course, guns don't kill people, people kill people. True, and I agree with that at one hand. On the other hand, do we need to all have the level of firearms we have? We could talk about our constitutional rights to have them, but at the end of the day, can we find a better way of managing having firearms out there in the public? Does everybody need to have AK-47s? Do they need to have, semi-automatic machine guns? You certainly don't need them for hunting. Do we need to be able to spew out as many rounds of ammunition as we can in a moment? There's a lot of questions here, and if we assume that there's no negotiation on this, we're never going to move forward with trying to figure out how to deal with, shootings in schools and things like that. I have friends who had kids at Sandy Hook Elementary School. I grew up the next town over from Sandy Hook. I have friends that were profoundly affected by that experience, and it's they are trying to sue the gun manufacturers for what's happening, and selling them, without any precautions is certainly a concern. I certainly have my issues when it comes to unfettered, uncontrolled, unmanaged firearm access. This is a serious issue for me personally. Prescription painkillers, right? The whole narcotics epidemic, and people using painkillers like oxycodone and fentanyl and things like that. They cause 15,000 deaths a year. They make people addicts. They engage then as addicts, engage in inappropriate behaviors, robbing people, killing others in order to feed their habit. So this is a horrible epidemic, and manufacturers need to take responsibility for how they market and sell these painkillers and how people prescribe them as well. And then playground equipment. They injure about 200,000 kids a year. We all know that there are risks when it comes to playground equipment, just as there are risks in driving a car or a motorcycle, using a gun, taking prescriptions, particularly very strong controlled prescriptions. Same thing with playground equipment injuries. Um, some of these things could be avoidable if they are designed in such a way to be protecting of the kids. But, I look at the playground equipment that I had as a kid. Everything was metal and it hot in the sun in the summertime, and you'd burn your butt and you'd pinch your finger, and, all sorts of injuries would happen. Versus nowadays, things tend to be plastic, making them less likely to hurt people, but there are still risks there, right? So we need to be mindful of this. The other thing we wanted to think about is product recalls, right? There are a lot of product recalls that happen. And product recalls happen when there is a known flaw. And it means that we are being called to recall these things and fix them or pull them off the market. And so, what are some common recalls that happened lately? Takata auto airbags in 2016, where the airbags were not, um, um, they were uh, they were failing to release appropriately, and they exploded, unexpectedly, which was problematic. These are all located on 250 in your textbook, by the way, to take a look at these. General Motors, automobiles also having some errors in them. Greed dehumidifiers, I'm not familiar with that one off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up really quick. The chenille robes catching on fire, I believe, and then the Nestle Tall House cookie dough having E. coli. So take a look at all of those. I believe that I recalled the chenille robe issue, but you should look into that in looking on in that interactive piece in the textbook about the different recalls and what happened. And some of these, and I don't think people go into it intentionally to design products that are um, that that are going to break down and have errors. I don't think people intentionally say, "Yeah, I'm going to make it shoddy so people catch on fire." But the problem is how they respond once they know that it's going to be a problem. Once because we don't always plan to make things hurt people, but at the same time, it can actually can continue to harm people if we don't make the effort to fix the issues when they occur.